Welcome to Midnight Grove, where we weave stories as intricate as the threads of the sky. Tonight's tale, The Cloud Weaver's Loom, takes us to the enchanting village of Aerlwyn, where a young dreamer named Sera embarks on a journey to mend the unraveling heavens. With courage and determination, she discovers her place among the stars. Settle in and let this magical bedtime story carry you into a world of wonder and peace. Chapter 1, Threads in the Sky. A new perspective on Aerlwyn. The small mountain village of Aerlwyn lay perched atop the world, like a well-kept secret. Nestled among rolling green hills and jagged peaks, its cobblestone streets wound through rows of cozy cottages with moss-covered roofs. Morning fog often curled through the valleys below, creating the illusion that Aerlwyn floated above the clouds. But for the people of Aerlwyn, clouds were no mere weather phenomenon. They were art. Every puff and wisp in the sky was crafted by the skilled hands of the cloud weavers, artisans who worked from the towering sky spire on the edge of town. Using looms of mist and light, the cloud weavers shaped the weather itself, their creations drifting across the heavens to bring rain, shade, and wind to the lands below. For young Sera, the sky spire was a place of wonder. She would often sit outside her family's small cottage, her gaze fixed on the spire's tall, spiraling form. Its windows glowed faintly at all hours, and every now and then she would catch glimpses of clouds forming from its highest chamber. "Maybe someday," her father would say, ruffling her dark curls as he returned from the fields. "You've got the spirit of a dreamer, and that's half the battle." But Sera wasn't so sure. The cloud weavers were chosen from the most skilled apprentices, and she had never even touched a loom. She was just a farm girl, spending her days gathering herbs and tending to the goats. Her chance came unexpectedly, on a day when the sky began to fall apart, a jagged line in the sky. It was late morning, and the marketplace was bustling with activity. Sera had just traded a bundle of sage for a loaf of bread when a hush fell over the square. People were staring upward, their faces filled with confusion and unease. Sera followed their gazes and froze. The sky, once bright and clear, now bore a strange, jagged line. It was faint at first, like a crack in glass, but as she watched, it began to widen. The line revealed a void that pulsed with unnatural darkness, and strange winds swept through the village, carrying whispers that made the hairs on Sera's neck stand on end. "It's a tear," someone murmured. "The tapestry is unraveling." Sera's heart pounded. She had heard stories of the sky tearing before, but only in old fables. The elders said the sky's magic was delicate and required constant care to remain intact. A tear, they warned, could mean disaster for the lands below. Before she could fully grasp what was happening, the cloud weavers emerged from the sky spire. They moved quickly, their silver robes billowing as they hurried toward the marketplace. At their head was Mistress Ilara, a tall woman with sharp features and a commanding presence. She raised her hands to silence the murmuring crowd. "The tear is spreading," Mistress Ilara said, her voice calm but urgent. "We must act quickly to repair it." "Can you fix it?" a man called out from the crowd. "We will do everything in our power," Mistress Ilara replied, though her tone carried a note of uncertainty. A sleepless night. That evening the tear in the sky had grown wider. Sera lay in bed, staring at the jagged line through her bedroom window. It seemed alive, its edges shifting and pulsing as though it were feeding on the sky around it. The strange winds returned, whispering words she couldn't quite understand. She shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "You'll have your chance one day." Her father's words echoed in her mind, filling her with a mix of hope and fear. She didn't know if she could make a difference, but she couldn't just sit by and do nothing. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Sera made her way to the sky spire. Inside the sky spire was even more magnificent up close. Its walls were made of a smooth, silvery stone that seemed to shimmer faintly in the early light. The entrance was guarded by a pair of apprentices, who eyed Sera warily as she approached. "What's your business here?" one of them asked. "I want to help," Sera said, her voice trembling but determined. The apprentice snorted. "Help? You're not a weaver. Let her through," came a sharp voice from behind the apprentices. Mistress Ilara stepped forward, her piercing gaze fixed on Sera. "What are you doing here, girl?" "I've studied your work my whole life," Sera stammered. "I understand how the threads move, how the patterns form. Please let me try." Mistress Ilara raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. "You think you can fix a tear in the sky?" Sera nodded, though her hands trembled at her sides. "I have to try." Mistress Ilara studied her for a moment longer, then sighed. "We don't have time to argue. Come inside." The apprentice loom. Inside the sky spire, Sera's breath caught. The main hall was vast and filled with the soft hum of spinning looms. Threads of silver, gold, and mist stretched across the room, weaving together in intricate patterns that seemed almost alive. Mistress Ilara led Sera to a smaller loom in the corner. "This is the apprentice loom," she said. "Use it to create a patch for the sky. Follow the patterns exactly." Sera's hands trembled as she sat at the loom. The threads felt cool and silky, their faint glow filling her with a strange sense of calm. Slowly, carefully, she began to weave. The work was harder than she had imagined. The threads were delicate, and the patterns required precision and focus. But as she worked, she found herself falling into a rhythm. The soft hum of the loom and the gentle pull of the threads quieted her nerves. She worked steadily, the silken threads twisting and knotting into a patch that shimmered faintly in the dim light. As Sera neared completion, she began to feel something she hadn't expected, a connection to the threads. It was as if they were alive, responding to her touch and guiding her hands toward the pattern they needed. Mistress Ilara returned to inspect her work. The woman's sharp eyes studied every knot and twist, and Sera held her breath, bracing for criticism. "It will do," Mistress Ilara said finally, her voice grudgingly approving. "Carry it to the Skycaster. We'll see if it holds." Sera's chest swelled with a mix of relief and pride. She followed Mistress Ilara up a winding staircase to the rooftop of the spire. where the Skycaster stood. The Skycaster's trial. The Skycaster was a massive contraption, its glowing arms reaching skyward like the branches of an enchanted tree. At its center was a platform where the patch was carefully placed. Surrounded by a web of glimmering wires, Sera stood back as Mistress Ilara adjusted the controls, the device humming to life. The air around it shimmered, and a beam of light shot upward, carrying the patch toward the jagged tear in the sky. For a moment it seemed to work. The edges of the tear began to close, the patch fusing with the tapestry like a healing wound. The winds calmed, and a murmur of hope spread through the gathered cloud weavers. But then the patch began to unravel. The tear widened again, swallowing the patch whole. The strange winds returned, stronger this time, carrying whispers that sounded almost like laughter. Mistress Ilara's expression darkened. "It's worse than we thought," she murmured. "What do we do now?" Sera asked, her voice trembling. Mistress Ilara hesitated, then turned to face her. "There's only one option left," she said. "The Loom of Legends." "The Loom of Legends." The words sent a ripple of unease through the gathered cloud weavers. Sera glanced around, noticing the apprentices exchange nervous glances. "What is the Loom of Legends?" she asked. "It's an ancient loom," Mistress Ilara explained, her voice low. "It predates the Sky Spire itself, and was said to have been crafted by the first cloud weavers. Its threads are powerful enough to repair even the greatest tears, but—" She hesitated. "But what?" Sera pressed. Mistress Ilara sighed. "The loom is hidden deep within the mountains, and it hasn't been used in centuries. Retrieving it will not be easy." "I'll go," Sera said without hesitation. The cloud weavers stared at her, their expressions a mix of surprise and doubt. "You don't even know where it is," one of the apprentices said. "I'll figure it out," Sera replied firmly. "If the loom can save the sky, I have to try." Mistress Ilara studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well, but you won't go alone." She gestured to a young apprentice, standing nearby, a boy with sandy hair and a nervous expression. "Rin, you'll accompany her." Rin's eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes," Mistress Ilara said firmly. "You're one of our best apprentices, and you know the mountains well." Rin nodded reluctantly, his gaze flicking toward Sera. "I hope you know what you're doing," he muttered. "So do I," Sera admitted. "The journey begins." The next morning, Sera and Rin set off for the mountains. The journey was long and treacherous, the narrow paths winding through steep cliffs and dense forests. Strange clouds swirled overhead, their dark shapes mirroring the growing tear in the sky. Rin was quiet at first, his nervous energy manifesting in quick glances and muttered observations about the trail. But as the hours passed, he began to relax, sharing stories about his time as an apprentice and his hopes of becoming a master weaver. "What about you?" he asked as they climbed a rocky slope. "Why do you want to be a weaver?" Sera hesitated, her gaze fixed on the trail ahead. "Because it's always felt like it was meant to be. Like the threads are calling me." Rin gave her a thoughtful look. Maybe they are. Their conversation was cut short when they reached a clearing. At its center stood a stone archway overgrown with vines and moss. The air around it shimmered faintly, and Sera felt a strange warmth in her chest. "This must be it," she said, her voice hushed. Chapter 2, The Loom of Legends. Sera stood before the stone archway, her heart racing. The air around it shimmered faintly, as though the arch were caught between this world and another. Vines twisted through its weathered stones, but the faint glow coming from within gave it an undeniable air of importance. "This is it," she whispered, stepping closer. Behind her, Rin hesitated. "Are you sure? It doesn't exactly scream safe." Sera glanced back at him, her expression firm. "If this is where the Loom of Legends is, we have to go." Rin sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Fine. But if we get eaten by shadow beasts, I'm holding you responsible." Sera couldn't help but smile as she stepped through the archway. The hidden hall. The air on the other side was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of moss and old stone. Sera and Rin found themselves in a vast chamber carved into the mountain, its walls lined with intricate carvings of clouds, stars, and woven patterns. The faint glow that had surrounded the archway now emanated from the carvings themselves, casting soft, shifting light across the room. At the center of the chamber stood the Loom of Legends. It was enormous, its frame carved from a shimmering wood that seemed to shift between silver and gold. Threads of light stretched across it, glowing faintly as they pulsed with a rhythm that felt almost alive. The loom hummed softly, its presence filling the room with a sense of awe and power. "This is incredible," Rin murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Sera approached the loom, her fingers brushing its cool surface. The threads vibrated faintly under her touch, and she felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. "This is what we need to save the sky," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. The loom's challenge. As Sera examined the loom, a voice echoed through the chamber. "Who seeks to use the Loom of Legends?" Sera and Rin spun around, their eyes wide. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, its tone deep and resonant. "I do," Sera said, stepping forward. Her voice trembled, but she stood tall. "The sky is unraveling, and we need the loom to repair it." The air shimmered, and a figure appeared before them. It was made of light and shadow, its form shifting constantly, as though it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. "The loom does not grant its power freely," the figure said. "Its threads are delicate, and only those who prove themselves worthy may weave them." "How do I prove myself?" Sera asked, her hands clenching at her sides. The figure gestured toward the loom. "The threads respond to the heart of the weaver. Show them your strength, your resolve, and your hope. Only then will they bend to your will." Sera nodded, stepping closer to the loom. She reached for the threads, her fingers trembling as they made contact. The warmth she had felt before now surged through her, filling her mind with visions of clouds, stars, and endless skies. But then the threads began to resist. They twisted and shifted under her hands, pulling away as though testing her resolve. "You can do this, Sera," Rin said, his voice steady. Just focus. Sera took a deep breath, her hands moving carefully along the threads. She thought of the tear in the sky, of the strange winds that carried whispers of chaos. She thought of her village, of her father's reassuring words, and of the dream she had carried for as long as she could remember. Slowly the threads began to yield, the sky's final patch. The loom hummed louder as Sera wove, the glowing threads twisting and knotting into patterns more intricate than anything she had ever seen. Each thread seemed to carry a piece of the sky's magic, and as she worked, she felt a deep connection to the tapestry above. Beside her, Rin watched in awe. "You're really doing it," he said softly. When the final thread was in place, the loom emitted a soft chime, and the finished patch floated gently into Sera's hands. It shimmered with a light that seemed to hold all the colors of dawn and dusk, its patterns shifting like the clouds themselves. "How you did it," Rin said, his face breaking into a grin. But the figure of light and shadow reappeared, its form flickering. "The patch alone is not enough," it said. "The weaver must deliver it to the sky." Sera's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" The figure extended a hand toward her. "The threads connect all things. Step into them, and they will carry you to the sky's heart." Sera glanced at Rin, who gave her a hesitant nod. "Be careful," he said. Taking a deep breath, Sera stepped forward. The figure's hand passed through her chest, and the world around her dissolved into light. The heart of the sky. Sera found herself standing in a place that defied explanation. She was surrounded by swirling threads of light, each one pulsing faintly as it wove through an endless expanse of stars. The tear loomed before her, larger and more menacing than she had imagined, its jagged edges crackling with dark energy. "This is it," she whispered, clutching the patch tightly. The threads around her seemed to sense her presence, guiding her toward the tear. As she approached, the darkness lashed out, sending shock waves through the threads. Sera stumbled but held her ground, the patch glowing brighter in her hands. "You won't win," she said through gritted teeth. She reached the edge of the tear and pressed the patch against it. The darkness resisted, pushing back with a force that sent pain shooting through her chest. But Sera held firm, pouring all her strength and hope into the threads. Slowly, the patch began to fuse with the edges of the tear. The dark energy faltered, and the tear began to close. When it was done, the sky was whole again. A weaver's legacy. Sera awoke on the floor of the chamber, the Loom of Legends humming softly beside her. Rin was at her side, his face pale with worry. "You're back!" he exclaimed. "The sky?" she asked weakly. "It's fixed," Rin said, a smile breaking across his face. "You did it." When they returned to the village, the Cloud Weavers greeted Sera with awe and gratitude. Mistress Ilara placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression softening for the first time. "You've proven yourself, Sera," she said. The threads chose wisely. Sera felt a warmth in her chest as she looked toward the sky, now whole and shimmering with clouds she had helped to save. "Thank you for joining us at midnight. Grove for the Cloud Weaver's loom. Sera's journey reminds us that even the smallest, Hands can mend the greatest tears, and that courage often begins with a single thread of hope. May this story inspire your dreams and guide you into a peaceful night. Sleep well and join us again soon for another enchanting tale.